Good morning, everyone. My name is Hannah. I'm the moderator for this session. I'm a senior instructional designer at at University Online Education Services and at Rutgers University. On behalf of 2000 to 2025 Rutgers University Online Learning Conference, I welcome Crystal Akers, an assistant teaching professor in the linguistic department at Rutgers University. During the presentation, please engage using the live chat. So you may pause any questions you have, and the presenter will answer in the end of the presentation or her presentation or as we go along. Crystal, your turn.
All right. We really are starting on the dot. This is impressive. All right. So hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today. It's great to see as many of you as you are here. And I was saying at the start of this, we're on spring break right now. So I'm impressed with all of you who are here today on spring break on a Monday morning at 9. So my talk today is before, during, and after class strategies for asynchronous learning. And you might be wondering, if I'm talking about asynchronous learning, why am I presenting in a synchronous session? So the answer to that is just purely selfish. I teach all of my courses in an asynchronous environment, but I also really enjoy this opportunity to talk to people and share ideas and hear from you. And I really hope that you will feel welcome to ask questions and respond throughout this presentation. So again, you can put questions or comments in the chat. And Hannah will draw my attention to them as we go. I've got 2 screens set up here. And I'll also leave time at the end for some questions and comments. All right, so I have 3 main goals for today. So first, to identify what are some asynchronous correlates for before, during, and after class periods. Second, to understand the cognitive science-informed learning strategies for these periods of time. And finally, to learn some tools for applying these strategies with a specific focus on fully online asynchronous environments. So before we dive in, I'd really like to get a sense of kind of who's here with me today. And so I have a Menti set up for you. And Hannah, you might be able to copy the link into the chat. You can go to menti.com and type in 91801011 to participate, and just share with us your current level of experience with using cognitive science-based learning strategies in online teaching, whatever that means to you. So. Yay, so we have a solid amount of experience here that has been using some of these cognitive science-based learning strategies that I talked about in the intro, I guess. Some folks who are using them regularly. I love it. I hope you'll share some ideas there along the way about how you're doing this too. Familiar with the research, but unsure how to apply it online. Got about a quarter of those, and new to both cognitive science-based learning strategies and online teaching. About a quarter of you responding to that as well. So a lot of you have used these strategies, but you want to learn some more about it. And that was exactly kind of the position I was in when I started looking into this a little bit more. All right, so leave this tab up because I will come back and ask you some questions later. But I'm going to flip back to the presentation now. Okay, so now, I see that some of you have a great deal of experience here. And if you've been teaching or, designing online courses for a while, you may already be familiar with the strategies I'm going to talk about today, some of them like retrieval practice or spaced repetition. But what I want to offer today is a practical framework for applying these systematically across an asynchronous course by giving kind of a way of thinking of what we do as happening before, during, and after class, even when there's no scheduled class time. And we'll also explore how to pair these strategies with specific tools so that hopefully you'll walk away not just knowing what works, but how to do it in an asynchronous format. And we'll also take a look at a creative way to kind of incorporate emotion into priming activities, because we know the cognitive science research tells us that memory and learning really are deeply tied to emotion and making connections with the material. All right, so I want to share a little bit about the inspiration for today, which came from my participation in a semester support group here at Rutgers. All right, so this group was organized by my colleague, Dr. Sheila Tabanli. She's an assistant teaching professor here in math at Rutgers. And so you might be wondering, what is a semester support group? Okay. So you can think of it as a multidisciplinary, non-hierarchical faculty group. And ours was organized around the goal of reducing the gap between research on student learning and higher ed teaching practices. So this was focused on work that Dr. Tabanli had been doing in her math courses. And so what made this opportunity really special was that it was truly multidisciplinary, brought together faculty, not just from different departments, but different Rutgers campuses. We had about 10 or so faculty, mostly from New Brunswick, but also from Rutgers Camden. And we came from chemistry, linguistics, math, psychology, even the writing program. We were meeting regularly throughout the year on Zoom, and we learned about a variety of different cognitive science informed learning strategies, as well as Dr. Tabanli's framework for applying these strategies to our courses. And we got the opportunity to learn from each other by observing how we were using these techniques in each other's courses. So I also want to say that the semester support group was funded by the Rutgers Teaching Excellence Network through an NSF grant provided to that group. And I personally was a recipient of a travel grant to present work with Dr. Tabanli and one of her students at the AAC&U conference in Washington last fall, where I shared some topics related to what I'm covering today. So just a big thanks to Dr. Tabanli for organizing that group and putting together the framework that inspired me to really dig into some fundamental questions that I think I've been thinking about pretty superficially in the past. Right, so here's a graphic that represents that RR2PG instructional framework. And I provided a link to one of Dr. Tabanli's recorded conference talks in the slides. So you can take that opportunity to learn more about this and about the semester support group experience too, if you like. So within this reducing the research to practice gap framework, it incorporates learning strategies informed by research in cognitive science. It gives us a very nice structure for identifying and utilizing some of the learning strategies that really are most time-tested and supported by research. So you see retrieval practice up there, and you have any experience with cognitive science-informed strategies, you know that's kind of like top of our list. And it gives instructors some clear models for thinking about when to employ these strategies, referring to like before class, during, and after class. So this framework was designed for, asynchronous class sessions. I'll notice too at the bottom, you'll see social emotional learning. That was something that was incorporated across all stages of learning in Dr. Tabanli's framework, but it's not something I'm going to talk about so much today. But again, I think this is, there was a real magic to putting this information together with this multidisciplinary faculty support group and kind of workshopping how to use these ideas. All right. Now, again, it was designed originally with synchronous courses in mind, but being part of this group inspired me to think about what these terms prior to, during, and after class mean for me as an asynchronous instructor. And what can I use to think about how to deploy some of these strategies at the right time, so to speak? And so while I felt in some ways like pretty comfortable that I could recognize different stages in the learning process, being part of this group and examining the structure here with reference to different periods of time really got me interested in kind of re-examining the function of time in the asynchronous environment. All right. Now, before diving in to how I adapted this into my courses, I just want to focus on time for a second. So I want you to carry with you this idea that several of the strategies here implicitly refer to time just by virtue of their names, right? So we're going to see this in the priming effect, retrieval practice, and spaced repetition in particular. Those of you who are familiar with Pomodoro know that it's very important there as well, but I'm going to focus on those. So priming implies a preparation for some event that will follow. Retrieval implies the return of something that came before. And then we have spaced repetition. It not only bears the implication of something that came before, something that's being repeated, but it adds this notion of spacing, the insertion of some duration of time. You can tell I come from a linguistics department, right? Digging into those meanings. All right, so in the talk today, I'm going to focus primarily on those three strategies because they're the ones where I think we really see the importance of attending to time. All right, so let's think about how we see time play out in the synchronous and asynchronous environments. All right, so synchronous course. I think it's safe to say that when we think of a traditional synchronous class model, what we have in mind involves these distinct time periods that really are defined by reference to the clock and the calendar, right? And they're centered around this scheduled class time. So the class time is the set, recurring, scheduled period where it's agreed students and instructors will come together. So, you know, if class time is scheduled for every Tuesday and Thursday from 2 to 3:20 p.m., then the activities that we say take place during class are just literally whatever activities take place during that specific time, wherever they take place, right? The classroom, Zoom, wherever, but it's the same agreed upon time for everyone. And so what this means is that the remainder of our teaching and learning experience takes place with reference to that set scheduled class time. So we have before class and after class, and those are just periods of time before and after those set scheduled class periods. And so one thing to notice is that during a semester or whatever period of instruction you have, trimester, the majority of the students' time in a synchronous course is spent outside of class, outside of those set scheduled periods. So in this example, meeting twice a week, this would fill about 3 hours of time during class, and the remainder is spent before or after. All right, so in the asynchronous model, how's time spent? So one of the earliest people working on online asynchronous learning was Star Roxanne Hiltz, local to New Jersey here at the New Jersey Institute of Technology and part of the Sloan Foundation. So Hiltz was a sociologist who started looking at virtual communities and computer networks in the 70s. And she was writing about virtual classrooms by 1994. And she defined what she called asynchronous learning networks. Now, you know, as ubiquitous as online learning and asynchronous online learning is today, I think many of us do feel familiar with the idea of what asynchronous learning means. But I do think it's valuable to kind of take a look at a definition just to examine it more thoroughly. So in Hiltz and Goldman 2004, they described what they called asynchronous learning networks. And that was kind of the original term Hiltz gave this. These are networks in which members of the class typically are not present at the same time or at the same place. They may be together by chance or by plan, but typically they are spread out in both space and time. ALN courses exist as a rolling present or continuously unfolding conversation that goes on around the clock 7 days a week. All right, now, Hiltz and Goldman say that these courses exist as a rolling present and continuously unfolding, but that's the course, right? The course exists as a rolling present, maybe. But what does that mean for a student's experience of learning in an asynchronous environment? So I was interested in, a priori, is there a sense in which periods of time, like before, during, and after, do those play out in the asynchronous environment if we think of the learner's experience? So now I want you to put aside the notion of time and instead think about like what the actions of learning look like within both types of courses. All right, so let's take a look at these periods of time from a more functional perspective and think about what kinds of activities of learning are taking place within these different periods. So again, what follows here, I don't think it's exactly groundbreaking, but I think it's useful to kind of go back to basics and think about what happens in these different time periods and how they function. All right, so in a traditional synchronous class model, I think we can start with the idea of before class as meaning any work that takes place before that scheduled class time. And so being the work that takes place before, it's the work of preparation. Attempting an initial read of some challenging material or watching a video, and even in a flipped classroom where students are learning new skills before class, the work of what happens before class is preparation for activities that take place during that scheduled class time. Now, this work doesn't have to take place individually, but I think it's safe to say it typically does, at least for some part of the semester. Maybe at later points you have more group work, that kind of thing. But I've chosen to illustrate this with a picture of the individual sitting alone, reading with the computer out. Now, during class, maybe the most traditional perspective on this, what is during class, is this really passive experience of a time period when the instructor is delivering a lecture and the activity of the learner is to receive the instructional content and maybe take notes on it. And right now, I'm really aware that that's what I'm doing. So I will have mentees coming up again so you can participate. Now, the learner's experience of that during class time really becomes more active when there are opportunities for students to ask the instructor questions, right? Or to answer questions. And then, the most active experience seems to involve students actually applying skills and knowledge during that time, right? So we talk about active learning strategies. So we can see active learning in examples like, a really engaging class debate of material that was read before class. But we also see it in things like small group work on problem sets and think, pair, share activities, right? So if we're thinking about traditional synchronous courses, that during class period is most distinguished from what happens before and after, just when students' opportunity for immediate interaction between individuals is most fully realized, right? So here I've illustrated this during class period with a group of people together in one place at one time. So by definition, immediate interactions have to take place in synchronous environments where we're gathering either in physical space or online at the same time. All right, and then after class is that period of time when we find activities like review and the completion of assessments. It's where homework takes place, maybe where essay writing takes place. I've illustrated the picture again with an individual, but again, this can be a period where students are working together on small group projects. So functionally, I think we can think of this as the period of time when we're using what we learned during the class period time, that instructional time. All right. Well, I think these same activities take place within asynchronous courses as well. And what's different is that in the asynchronous courses, we don't have the set scheduled class times to serve as bounded time periods for our during class portions of the instruction. So instead, as instructors, we can impose the bounded time conditions ourselves using things like Canvas or other features of the LMS. We can set availability conditions where we lock and unlock content at specific days and times. We can release content based on ordering requirements, where we require that certain specific actions take place in a specific order. So you can see in the picture here an example of how these ordering conditions are displayed in Canvas, right? Where you can require students to complete all or some of the activities in a module and even set them to occur in a specific order. So again, remember that Hiltz and Goldman referred to asynchronous courses as existing in a rolling present or a continuously unfolding conversation that goes on around the clock 7 days a week. But really, we carve up that asynchronous week into discrete bounded periods of time that all the learners are operating within. So we can define before, during, and after class by what kinds of activities primarily take place within them. So preparation, instruction, review, and assessment. And we can organize these activities in time by imposing ordering and time conditions on the activities using the LMS. And also remember that I said that the during class learning period, it's most distinguished from the before and after just when the students' opportunities for immediate interaction between individuals is most fully realized. So I think that immediacy is really critical to the magic of what happens during class in a synchronous modality. And I think even in an asynchronous course, we can incorporate those immediate interactions, at least between an individual student and the instructor or material. So we'll take a look at those. All right, so just before we move on, I want to return to this instructional framework that inspired this talk from Dr. Tabanli's RR2PG semester support group. And what I'm proposing here is that to apply this framework to an asynchronous course, it helps to think about how these periods of times function for the learner, to think about the kinds of activities that will be taking place, preparation, instruction, review, and assessment, and then incorporate the learning strategies informed by cognitive science that align with those functions. Okay, so let's take a look at some of these strategies. All right, so before class, that preparation for instruction, I want to focus here on priming. So priming works best when we incorporate factors that accelerate and enhance memory. So what does that include? All right, so I've cited Miller 2022 here. Her book, referenced in the slides, is excellent for understanding the psychology of memory and how it relates to learning that takes place online. But one thing we know from cognitive psychology is that visualization helps information stick. If we can connect visual imagery to the content, then students will have an easier time recalling the content later. Same thing with provoking curiosity and providing some kind of emotional charge. So we can provoke curiosity by asking open-ended questions and even assigning exercises that students are kind of just barely able to attempt. So provoking curiosity itself can help to heighten surprise, kind of adding that bit of emotion. And emotion heightens memory. So if you can provoke curiosity with a little bit of emotional charge, then you're working with a recipe for success in memory retention. That's what the research tells us. So we also know priming works well when we create activities that activate prior knowledge. So that can be done with things like pre-quizzes, if we're asking about information students might already know. Cognitive psychology tells us that linking new information to what students already know really helps with remembering new information. All right, so one of my new favorite priming activities involves the tool Perusal, which is one of these social annotation tools. You might be familiar with like Perusal or Hypothesis already. Both of those involve social annotation, and that means that students can read a text or watch a video. In the examples I'm going to show you, they can look at pictures and they can annotate them as individuals, but also kind of see and reply to each other's comments if the instructor allows that setting. Now, this is a priming activity. And so what I'm showing here is how it was presented to my students as an intro activity for a module in my language and law class. So in terms of shaping how my students engaged with this, the intro activity needed to be completed for participation. And then once it was submitted, the instructional components of that module would open up for students. So it's kind of event triggered, right? Submit this intro, this priming activity, and then get to the content. So the idea is the intro takes place before the instructional content of the module, and hopefully it does that work of preparing students for what's coming in the instructional content. I'm not going to read these instructions in full to you, but I want to show you what these examples actually look like. All right, so this was for my course called Language and Law. This is an upper level elective in my department. So this activity was designed to introduce my students to our module on language used during a trial. And during the instructional content, I knew I would be introducing my students to the power imbalance between different participants in the trial. And I'd be linking that power imbalance to linguistic features that we see in how attorneys ask questions and how witnesses answer questions, and how jurors perceive the credibility of witnesses based on how they talk. So this priming activity is designed with all of this in mind. And I asked students to simply look at the set of sketches and comment on what they reveal. So who has power? Are there differentials in power? So let's try out an example here. I can give you a link to try this in Perusal if you already have it, but I think if you don't already have a membership to Perusal, it just makes sense to maybe put in the chat. So as you're looking at this, what do you notice about power in the courtroom? It's your time to chime in and give me that sense of immediacy. What do you notice about power? If you want to leave a comment in the chat. So Tammy and Judith both making the comment here about the judge sitting higher in the room. Anything else we notice? Nicer chair. That is true. Leaning in. I like that. Literally overseeing the room. Yeah, the standing attorney is leaning forward. Aggressive stance by the lawyer. Any comments there about the witness? It can cause the powerless to seemingly feel vulnerable. Nonverbal language seems nervous. Yes. So, you know, what we're seeing in your comments is that you're looking at how these figures are positioned and thinking about what they mean in terms of who has power. You're noticing things like where the judge is relative to the others. You're noticing the lawyer leaning in. You're noticing this witness who looks kind of nervous, right? Good. Now you might see that there are these yellow blotches here on the screen. Yes, the witness can't see everyone in the room. The judge is sitting behind her. Yeah. Okay, so there are these yellow blotches in the picture. I've copied this straight out of my course's assignment on Perusal. So these yellow blotches you see are places where one or more students specifically commented on this picture. So maybe instead of referring to the judge, they, highlighted this, instead of referring to the lawyer, they highlighted this area and commented on it. And then this enabled other students to kind of comment right after that if they wished. So here, some students were commenting like you did, the witness sitting in the box, the attorney leaning in. And I like this picture a lot because it introduces a number of different participants in the process. But I gave them a set of pictures. So let's continue here to think about how this works with priming. All right, so here's another one. We get a slightly different aspect. So what do you notice here? What do you want to say about power here? The witness is boxed in. The attorney can walk around. Yep. Any others? Yeah, the attorney standing has more power. The positioning makes me think of the witness being ambushed by the attorney. The witness looks scared. Yeah, so we have this client here seeing, this, I think what we're seeing here on this slide is actually a bit smaller than my students would see. So if you could see this a bit more of the picture that I gave them, you would see that this is more of a client rather than a witness. So we get one more participant in the courtroom. And this client's kind of shrinking away from the attorney, right? Who's standing and being much more physically dominant. So I'm setting up this priming activity, again, where students are able to visualize the power differentials in the courtroom. And, you're using a lot of emotional words too, scared and vulnerable. So you're getting a sense of emotion from this. Now, if there was any chance you were missing the emotion in this, typically students picked it up in this next picture. All right. So this is one last example. I had like a set of 5 and students could pick what they wanted to talk about. So here I chose an image that would really ratchet up the emotional content of the image. It also brought in another participant in the courtroom, which is the jury members. Now, I did kind of scrutinize those drawings in the background to be sure that didn't show anything violently graphic or inappropriate. But it's really the suggestion you get, the hint of these drawings, the reactions on the faces of the members of the jury that delivers that emotional charge, right? And we can see that someone has the power to talk, someone has the power to present evidence, and certain other participants don't have that power. They have to receive this information, right? They can't choose. So we're linking visual imagery to content that would be part of the instructional material, and we're adding in that emotional charge to make this content easier to retrieve in the future. All of these sketches were by Marilyn Church, I want to say, and they're from actual trials. And I think that having these visuals be drawings rather than like photos or stills from movies or the news really helped in this case, because it added, I think there's an interpretive quality to the artist's renderings that really helped to symbolically represent the power differentials. So even like the size of this attorney relative to the jury, we're seeing that power he had to bring these images to the jurors and force them to look at them. A couple slides back where, the witness couldn't see the judge. I'm actually not sure if the courtroom was set up that way, but certainly it's presented that way. And so it gives us that symbolic understanding that the witness is really penned in and, has to respond to what's being given to her. So, I think these drawings really helped with this. Jury looks surprisingly interested. Yeah, I think, they're shocked, horrified. I don't know. But yeah, I'm glad they're paying attention if they're members of a jury. All right, so the next piece of this priming activity was to then take a look at a short excerpt of witness cross-examination and just comment on what stands out about the language of questioning and testimony. So in the instructional content of the module, I knew that my students were going to learn things like, how to notice that witnesses in cross-examination are overwhelmingly asked yes/no questions, often with very complicated phrasing in the question, often inserting backgrounded information and details that really can't be addressed by a yes or no, all right? But right now, those specifics really are just beyond what the students know. And what I want to do here in this priming activity is provoke curiosity about this language. And so here's another screenshot from perusal. The yellow highlighting shows areas where my students were talking about some of the language you can see here. And you can see they were noticing the witnesses' very constrained answers like yes. They were noticing this word suggest, where that's not really a question, right? If you're suggesting something. So, they were starting to attend to these linguistic features of question and answer that they were going to be learning about later. And I hope that all of this was tied with that emotion from viewing those pictures and thinking about how the kind of situational power differences then were reflected in the linguistic power differentials that they learn about later. Okay, so during class, instructional activities. That's the period of instructional time, right? So here I want to focus on retrieval practice as the cognitive science informed learning strategy. So I really like Miller's definition here that learning is exactly what happens when we practice pulling information out of memory. So retrieval practice is such an important strategy for learning that you might have noticed it was the one strategy that appeared in that RR2PG framework in every category before, during, and after class. Now, research tells us it's best when it's open-ended or short answer in style. It's important to give immediate feedback, just like during class, right? And if we can do that, then we're approaching really that immediate interaction that characterizes what during class means in a synchronous course. And retrieval practice can be implemented for very low stakes or no stakes so that it's really in support of learning and not assessment. All right, so let's take a minute to try this out back in Menti. There's a QR code here for you. It's the same Menti that you were in before. So I'm going to all right. So same Menti. So based on what you've heard so far, trying retrieval practice here, what is one factor you can incorporate into a priming activity to accelerate or enhance memory? Thanks, Hannah. Hannah provided the link here if you need it. Visuals. Yes, there's more. What else do you remember? Reassessment, yes. Annotation. Memory boost activities. I'm curious what you have in mind there. Priming question. Emotional response, annotations. Connecting new material to existing knowledge. Yeah, we got those connections here. All right. Peer instruction. All right, I'm going to move us back into, all right. Okay. All right, so you named some of the ones that I was looking for, right? You mentioned visuals, you mentioned adding emotion. You mentioned also some of the things that we did, like the adding annotations and whatnot. I would, you know, more generally, we can do things like ask open-ended questions, assign exercises students are just barely able to attempt. And some of you also came up with things like pre-assessment, pre-quizzes, and remembered that idea of linking new information to what students already know. All right, so, you know, in my courses, I like to be intentional about incorporating retrieval practice in the video lectures. And I do that using PlayPosit. I feel like if it's like a thumbs up or something, I'm curious. Probably a lot of you are familiar with this too. So PlayPosit allows me to embed questions in the midst of lectures. Now, before showing you an example of how that looks, I just want to mention one other learning strategy informed by cognitive science, and that is elaborative interrogation. So this involves asking students to generate an explanation for some given fact, like why does this or that happen, right? So according to research reviewed by Dunlewski et al., this strategy is useful when students already have some domain knowledge. So it really incorporates nicely within the period of time we think of as during class or during the instructional period. So I'm going to show you how I implement it in PlayPosit. But again, this kind of question can be implemented in many different kinds of tools, Perusal, Canvas quizzes, or assignments. Delivering it in PlayPosit, though, allows me to provide that immediate feedback that's most like synchronous interaction. So here's an example. This is from my course on language of advertising. So this question arises toward the end of a 12-minute lecture. And the format is the video stops. Students have to answer the question to continue. And then the video continues with my explanation of the answer. So here we have an example of a book you probably recognize, Each Shoots and Leaves. The name itself beautifully represents the power of ambiguity here. So in this case, the book's cover also provides visual priming for students to think about the two interpretations. So we have, you know, the hungry panda and we have the murderous panda. And the difference not only hangs on punctuation, because I'm in a linguistics course, right? It's not just the punctuation, but on the lexical categories of the words in the title. So is shoots a noun or a verb? Is leaves a noun or a verb? That difference is what gives us hungry panda or murderous panda. So we have this lexical ambiguity that results in two possible interpretations. And the point is, this book on punctuation is supposed to, help you sort out how to distinguish those two meanings when they occur in writing. So my question for students, first ask them to engage in retrieval practice with an open-ended question. So what kind of ambiguity is shown in the title? So we've learned about lexical ambiguity and structural ambiguity in the course, and we need to be able to understand the difference. And then I ask them a question based on elaborative interrogation as well. So why is this ambiguity effective for advertising this book? So the question itself is presupposing that the ambiguity is effective. So students don't have to make a judgment on that. They just have to be able to make a case for why it's effective. And then they submit their answer, and then they get to hear, thank you, my explanation, providing them immediate feedback on the possible answers. I also like to give students a heads up that they are doing these cognitive science-based learning strategies. So here I said, test yourself. Lately, I'm saying something more like time for retrieval practice. And I let students know why we do retrieval practice is because this is such a powerful tool for learning. And being explicit in that way was another tip from the semester support group, by the way. All right, so I'm going to skip to after class, this review period now. Focus specifically on review, not, I also consider assessment part of this period, but I want to talk about review, thinking about the strategies of spaced repetition. And you might also know the term distributed practice. So I think of this as retrieval practice completed at spaced intervals. According to Miller's review of the research, spacing breaks down the association between specific environment cues and what's being learned. And that, enhances the benefits of retrieval practice. Dunlewski and all say that long intervals may be best for core content or long-term retention. So when we think about helping students return to material and review it multiple times, what might that look like in an asynchronous course? So if you want to put that in the chat to share your ideas here, I would love to have a chance to see them. I'll say that for me, spaced repetition is implemented, even those types of spaced repetition is implemented even during those instructional videos. So if I'm asking questions about content they've learned previously. So especially when the concepts or information is core and essential to whatever we're doing in the course, I'm going to weave that retrieval practice throughout all the later instruction we do in the course. It'll come up across weeks of the semester in different kinds of examples. I'm not going to show any particular examples of this, but I do want to say that according to the research reviewed by Dunlewski et al., spaced repetition works even for complicated content. Yvonne, I see your question there. So they mentioned, complex motor skills, nuanced definitions, not just things like remembering times tables, okay? So you could imagine doing something like this to recall like physiological processes. All right, so to conclude here, what I want to leave you with is that a student's asynchronous interactions within a course serve functions that correlate to the kind of work that take place before, during, and after scheduled synchronous times, like preparation for instruction, receiving instructional content, and conducting review and assessment. So that RR2PG framework we saw can be used across modalities to apply this evidence-based learning to appropriate asynchronous interactions. All right, if you want to go back to the Menti, and I'm going to address Yvonne's question here, but if you want to go back to the Menti, I have one last question for you. A strategy or tool you're excited to take away, or just something you're taking away from this. All right. So Yvonne, you said in this interrogation in PlayPosit for my asynchronous class, it is, how do I prevent students from entering nonsense, basically just to continue with the coursework? So if I'm doing a free response question, I can't prevent that, right? I can, however, and do review their work to see what it is that they are submitting. And so, if I'm offering this for participation, then I could withhold, if they're not like dually participating in it. What I'll say is I do require those interactions. I require students to complete the Play Pause It video and to submit for a certain number of questions. Sometimes I have multiple choice questions, and there is multiple choice questions, and sometimes there is a right or wrong answer. So like if there's 10 questions, maybe I'll require that they earn like a 70% on it and enable them to repeat. So what I find is because this is linked to kind of a participation grade, it's not based on right or wrong. And because it's going to be obviously connected to what we're doing later in like the review or assessment type portion, I find my students have been pretty willing to be sincere in their answers and actually give a real answer there. I'm curious, you struggle with that? Yeah. I think sometimes doing things like talking about the types of responses you get. So, sending out the Canvas announcement afterwards that, highlight great answers so that people know that this is being taken seriously in the class. I know. I love the visuals in priming activities, Judith. I'm glad you're taking that away. And I think that really can apply. It was perfect in my language and law course. I loved being able to show the participants in the courtroom. But I think you can also do this with other types of, with other disciplines, right? So I could imagine a case where maybe you're showing a graph and you want people to maybe start to try to understand it. Or, you're showing like, I don't know, like, I'm imagining like an anatomical diagram because one of my colleagues is in here who teaches anatomy and physiology of the speech mechanism. And so I could imagine maybe priming students to start thinking about like how this view of the mechanism is different than this other view and what that might mean for physiology. I could imagine these types of things. Using a priming question to lead into the current module. I love these kind of intro activities. I've really enjoyed adding them to my modules where, it's like an easy way to participate. Hopefully it's kind of fun. I get that fun emotion in there. And if I can, provoke that curiosity and get people interested, then I like being able to do that. Yeah, you teach in person, but you're excited to do the priming exercises. I'm so glad. I really think that asynchronous and synchronous is in some ways not as different as we make it out to be. So, that immediacy is so important, but in that during class portion, but there's so much of learning that happens outside of it that we can really use a lot of these activities at different times. All right, so Hannah gave a link to a Google Drive where you can see these slides, and I also have like a Google Sheet there with links to some of the tools and some other articles if you're interested in thinking about time in synchronous versus asynchronous environments. And I'm happy to take any other questions you might have, if you have any. I've got about 3 minutes, I think. Hey, thanks, Janice. Thank you for coming today, and I'm glad it's been helpful. Oh, comments about optimal class sizes for async. Dave, that is a hot question there. The classes I teach have about 33 students per section. I will say, the pieces that I can automate where, if I can show the video and have like that immediate interaction is very helpful for like reducing the load on the instructor. But, I find that the bigger they get, it is complicated, right? The bigger the class size. I think I would prefer to have a little less than 33, but that's also because I'm someone who really likes to interact with what the students are talking about and, to share examples of great work with other students through the Canvas announcements and things. If I maybe was using more, automated things like like multiple choice questions and in the videos, and lots of objective types assignments, like multiple choice quizzes, maybe I'd be more comfortable with bigger classes, but 33 seems all right.